We'd been trying for a baby for a very long time. Probably, I would say 2008 we started. My wife, Amanda, she lost her mum.
Ken hadn't really wanted children before then, but he changed his mind, I think, because he didn't want his parents not to meet his children. And after my mum died, it made him realise that if we didn't do it soon, they might not get to meet them. So we started trying, and it took 11 months for me to get pregnant, which was much longer than we expected. And it didn't last long. After 6 weeks, I miscarried. And then I think it only took a few months again to get pregnant, and I miscarried again. And then it happened again a few months later. I had a few tests, and they said everything was fine and we should just try again. When we did try, we got pregnant quite easily, quite quickly. And then I thought I was having another miscarriage, and I went for a scan and they said it was ectopic, and they immediately admitted me to hospital and performed an operation to remove my right fallopian tube. After a few months we tried again, and again thought it was a miscarriage, went to the hospital and found out that it was another ectopic. The tube wasn't in the best state, but it was clear, so they said we could try again. So we did. A few months later I was pregnant again, and we found it was ectopic again, and I was admitted to hospital and had an emergency tube removal of my left tube.
So that left us with no tubes and not a lot of hope of, well, no hope of getting pregnant naturally.
Each of the pregnancies were difficult. The first one, we were so happy, and then it falls apart very quickly. And then as a couple, you stop talking to each other because you don't want to upset the other one. So in some ways it pushed us apart, and it made our relationship very difficult.
It obviously affected her emotionally, physically. She was very, tired, and it made us both think that it would probably never happen.
Each of the pregnancies ended before, I think the latest we got to was 8 weeks, which some people would not understand, that you've already become attached to that baby. Each one I've found out between 5 and 6 weeks was pregnant. So for that 2 weeks, even though you know that you've already lost babies, you're still hopeful that it won't happen again. So you become attached. With the last ectopic, it was even harder. When we went to the hospital for a scan, the baby had a heartbeat. Sorry.
It's fine, it's okay.
When we went to the hospital for the scan, the baby had a heartbeat, and it makes it very difficult because you know that the baby's in the wrong place and you can't keep that baby, but you also know it's alive. Whereas with the previous miscarriages and ectopics, none of those babies were alive. They were just cells, and that's how you deal with it, by accepting that they weren't ever alive. To have to sign a piece of paper to say someone can take away a baby that has a heartbeat and destroy it is very difficult. And it made me very angry with my own body and with myself, because you feel you've failed because you can't do something that is so natural.
Losing the babies to me was obviously very, very difficult to deal with, but I guess my priority was looking after my wife and making sure she was okay, and supporting her.
We knew that we had 2 choices: give up or try IVF.
The fears of doing IVF were, is it going to work? Because obviously going through what we'd been through already, We didn't want another letdown. I would say we both went into it with not a great outlook, not expecting to get a great deal out of our IVF treatment.
I'd heard all the horror stories about the process you go through for IVF, how you become stressed, and not just the stress of the actual doing it, but how the hormones you're injecting can make you feel awful.
So towards the end of the treatment, they do an egg retrieval, and on that retrieval we managed to get 4 eggs. One of them was no good. One was fragmented.
Which is really lucky. Most women get more, but have a percentage of them that don't fertilise. So out of 4 to get 3 that fertilised was brilliant. 2 days later they rang and said that the 3rd egg wasn't growing at all, so they didn't hold out much hope of our treatment working. When they said that, we just thought, right, okay, we'll see what happens.
After they've been fertilised and put back in, we have to return to the clinic and take a pregnancy test.
After, I think, 12 days, I decided I'd do a home test. It didn't show I was pregnant. It didn't show anything at all. So the next day I did another test and it showed I was pregnant. I just thought, we'll see what happens. I've lost lots of babies. But I'd had all the drug treatments that I needed to have. So we were sort of hopeful. We went for a scan and I was 6 weeks and 5 days pregnant. Ken was in the room and a nurse who was there during most of my treatments.
Put the ultrasound over her belly and he pointed out there's a heartbeat. And obviously we were ecstatic, very happy, obviously still very worried. He panned across with the ultrasound and the nurse next to me started giggling.
I said there was another one, wasn't there? And the nurse started giggling and she said there was another 2. And I just looked at Ken and was just totally shocked.
We just couldn't believe it, to be honest. It's certainly not what we expected. I was over the moon, obviously, but the worry sort of set in straight away that there's 3 of them. How do we cope?
Immediately I googled, which I shouldn't have done, because Google tells you the worst stories in the world, and it did set me into a bit of a panic, worrying that we weren't going to bring home any babies still.
I received a phone call from my wife must have been about 11:30 at night, saying that her waters had broke. Around 9:30, we were told that we were going into surgery for the C-section for the babies to be born.
I didn't get to see them. They were put straight into incubators and taken to special care.
We didn't know how long they would be on oxygen, so it was obviously very scary. They were very tiny. We had 3 babies. One was £2.13, one was £3.7 and one was £4.
Because I'd had a cesarean, I was unfit to go anywhere, so I was put in a separate ward.
She was allowed to go round to see them, and we saw all 3 babies and wires coming out of every part of their body pretty much, which was obviously very scary.
Luke straight away was the healthiest. He was the one who was doing the most, and he was the first to be weaned off of CPAP. Toby was doing very well actually, considering how tiny he was. He wasn't far behind Luke, but he did have a little setback. When they tried to mix formula milk with my breast milk, he became a little bit ill, which set him back a few days. Whereas Elliot, which I always assumed that the heaviest baby would be the healthiest, Elliot was the most sick. He had collapsed lungs. He needed blood transfusions. He was very ill.
They said this was down to his weight and the fact that his lungs weren't developed enough to cope with the body mass and the oxygen that was needed. So he had to have chest drains put in on 3 occasions, which was very scary because we could see them putting their hands in the incubator and cutting his side open and inserting their tubes.
Although he was the biggest, he was the last I got to hold, I think he was 2 weeks old before I held him. And I'd held Luke at 2 days old. I'd held Toby at 3 days old. So to wait 2 weeks was very hard.
Seeing him laying there helpless and not being able to help him. Obviously that was the same with the others as well. Although they didn't have the collapsed lungs, they were, we felt very helpless because we couldn't get them out, couldn't cuddle them.
I was only in hospital for 2 days after they were born, and then I was discharged. From 23 days after they were born was the first day that the first one came home. Luke came home after 23 days and was tiny still, just over 5 pounds, so still a very tiny baby, but totally healthy. So I had him home that evening, and then the next morning I had to get up, put him in a buggy and take him to the hospital because I still had 2 more babies to visit. So there was no time to enjoy snuggly time at home with the new baby because there were 2 more. Toby came home after 28 days, so his little stomach problem only put him back a couple of days. Elliot was in for 46 days. He came home still on oxygen, which meant before we could leave the hospital with him we had to have meetings with health visitors and specialist nurses because they would need to monitor his oxygen at home.
So dealing with triplets and dealing with triplets with one on oxygen. So the stress levels and the worry was, I guess, unexplainable.
Life has changed completely since having the babies. You can fit one baby into your lifestyle. You have to make changes, but 3 babies, it's total life change. I always knew that I would take maternity leave and then the plan would be go back to work. The plan was have a year off, but with 3 babies you can't do that. So my life until they go to school is at home with them. In some ways I love it, and in some ways it's awful because you don't have adult conversation.
The time that we've had so far, it's been 1.5 years and it's gone so fast that it hasn't even sunk in to me really that I'm a father of triplets. I still wake up every day excited by the fact that I am, which again is amazing. The only advice I can give to anyone who is having a multiple pregnancy or who has just had a multiple pregnancy is take each day as it comes. Get help, but don't get too much help because you need to be able to deal with it on your own. And I think it's most important not to surround yourself too much with help because when that help's not there, it's very hard. So do as much as you can on your own and you'll be fine.
Everything changes for everyone. It's how you cope with it. I've just got on with it because you have 2 choices. You either get on with it or you sit in the corner and cry, and I don't have time for that, so I've got to get on with it.